Okay, now we'll start off with different site-specific entities. We'll start off with wrist and hand, then we'll progress to the forearm and the elbow, then shoulders. Like that, we'll cover different sites. Okay, so coming to, we'll start off with the wrist and hand. So, quick brush up of basic anatomy of the wrist. You all will be familiar with all the carpal bones, starting from the side of the thumb, scaphoid, lunate, triquetral, and the pisiform. Then comes trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, and the hamate. So I use the code, she looks too pretty, try to catch her. Okay, whichever is convenient for you. Okay, so the two most important views that you take for the wrist joint is the AP and the lateral. So this is the AP view, and next comes the lateral, which is very important. So lateral view, well, the common bones that you need to remember is you need to remember only few bones. Okay. Uh, the most important bone. Okay. How will you start off with the lateral views? It's not so difficult. Okay. Just see whatever bone that is most striking for you. Okay. Okay. First, let's see the main bones. This is the radius that you're seeing over here, then the carpal bones and the metacarpal bones. Okay. So among the carpal bones, which is the most striking bone that you're seeing? The most strike, and this is the anterior or the volar aspect, and this is the posterior aspect. Okay. And the most striking bone that you are seeing here is these two bones, okay, which is in the anterior aspect. So this these two are trapezius and the scaphoid. Now, the scaphoid is the most important bone. Okay, so I use the code TITS, TITS. Okay, this is T, then ITS. Okay, so T is the trapezius and S is the scaphoid. Okay, so that is anterior or the volar aspect. Then behind this scaphoid, there's a large bone. So you can see it over here. Actually, it is quite larger than this. I don't know why it looks little small over here. Anyways, that is the capitate. Okay. Then the next bone is the lunate, which will be in like a moon, and it will be in contact with the radius, the distal part of the radius. Okay. And the pisiform bone you'll see within the scaphoid. You can see over here the margin, you can see. You'll see within the scaphoid. So these are the important bones that you need to remember. Only these much. If you are interested, you can also learn the hamate. It will be somewhere over here. Okay. Okay. You'll see a few more examples. Okay. Okay. Here you can see the same thing again, which is the radius, the distal part. Then the lunar shaped bone in contact with the radius is the lunate. Then the large bone above it is the capitate. Capitate. Okay. Here this is the anterior aspect or the volar aspect, and this is the posterior aspect. So here you're again seeing two large bones. This is trapezius, and this large bone is the scaphoid. And there's another bone within the scaphoid you're seeing. That is the pisiform bone, and this is the scaphoid. Okay, this is the capitate, and this is the lunate. Okay, and coming down, few more bones. Few more examples. Okay, again, trapezium. I said trapezium, right? Yeah. So trapezium, anteriorly you'll see the trapezium and the scaphoid, which is very prominent. Trapezium and the scaphoid, which is prominent. And the bone behind that, the large bone behind that is the capitate. And the luna-shaped lunate in contact with the radius, you'll see over here. And if you're interested, you can learn one more bone, that is the hamate over here. It's of not much significance, but you can learn. Okay. And so that is the, and one more example we can see again here, the two big bones in front, what it's the trapezius and the lunate, I'm sorry, scaphoid, the scaphoid and the trapezius. Then the large bone behind that is the capitate, and the bone in contact with the radius, the lunar-shaped bone is the lunate, and the pisiform bone you can see within the scaphoid. Okay, so that is the basic anatomy in the lateral view. Okay, now one very important thing is how to know if a lateral X-ray of the wrist is a true lateral. That is very important. So here what you need to look for is you need to look at the palmar cortex. Okay, this is the palmar side or the anterior or the volar side. Volar or the anterior side or the palmar side. Okay, and this is the dorsal side or the posterior side. So you have to look for the palmar cortex of the scaphoid and palmar cortex of the capitate. Okay, so here you can see the palmar cortex of the capitate is over here, and the palmar cortex of the scaphoid is over here. And also look at the palmar cortex of the pisiform bone. It will come over here. Okay. So this palmar cortex of the pisiform bone will be in the center of the palmar cortex of the scaphoid and the capitate. It should be in the center or the middle third. Okay. If it is perfectly aligned, it will should be in the center. But being in the middle third also is fine to be called as a true lateral. Okay. So let's see some examples. Here, what are we seeing? Here, this is the scaphoid. The palmar cortex of the scaphoid is over here. You can see it over here. Then palmar cortex of the capitate comes over here somewhat. And the pisiform bone, the palmar cortex is somewhere here. So this is not a true lateral. Okay. Then over here, what are we seeing here? This is the anterior aspect. The scaphoid is over here. The palmar cortex of the scaphoid comes like this. And the palmar cortex of the capitate comes over here. And the palmar cortex of the pisiform comes somewhat over here. So this is perfectly fine to be called as a true lateral. Okay. So this is how you identify if there is any rotation in the lateral X-ray of the wrist. So this is a true lateral. True lateral. Okay. So now let's start off with scaphoid fracture. It's a very interesting fracture. Okay. So this is a scaphoid bone you're seeing over here. So scaphoid fracture can happen in three areas. This is the distal pole. Okay. This is the distal pole, this is the proximal pole, and this area is the waist. The scaphoid bone has these three important parts. So the most common fracture, almost 60% of the fracture happens in the waist. Okay. That is the most common area for a fracture in the scaphoid bone. And the scaphoid bone as such, scaphoid bone fracture is more common scaphoid bone fracture is more common in young adults, young children actually, young children, because of fall on the outstretched arm. But for the same trauma of falling on the outstretched arm, in an old person, they'll get a distal radial fracture. Okay, fall on outstretched arm. Okay, the same fall. The same fall, the same outstretched arm trauma in an old adult, in a old person like a granny, will result in a distal radial fracture. Okay. So in the scaphoid fracture, we'll talk about the waist fracture. Okay. The waist fracture, the most important thing that you need to remember in a waist fracture is a humpback deformity. Okay, so this is a humpback whale that you are seeing over here. And this is a humpback deformity. What happens is here you're on the lateral X-ray. In the lateral X-ray, this is the normal view of the scaphoid. So when a fracture happens, there is two parts. This is the proximal part and there is a distal part. Okay, you see. This is the proximal part and this is the distal part. So there is some amount of rotation within the proximal distal part, and this will result in a bulge, which is known as the yeah. So this bulge will cause this humpback deformity of the scaphoid. And I have one more image. Okay, I don't have any other image. Anyways, you need to remember that the scaphoid fracture, only the waist part results in this humpback deformity, and it is seen on the lateral X-ray only. Okay. Okay. So the most important thing about the scaphoid fracture is highly prone for avascular necrosis. Highly prone for avascular necrosis and malunion. Okay. So this fracture, when it happens on the scaphoid, the distal part, I mean the proximal part is the most vulnerable for avascular necrosis and AVN. The proximal pole of the scaphoid is most at risk for avascular necrosis and malunion. And there's a reason for this. It's quite surprising because usually in the human body, the proximal part is better supplied by blood, and the distal part, the blood supply will be comparatively less. So usually in the human body everywhere, the distal part is more prone for avascular necrosis, right? But in the scaphoid bone, the proximal part is more prone for avascular necrosis. Why is this? This is because of retrograde flow of blood in the scaphoid. That is, the blood supply in the scaphoid happens from the distal to the proximal part. Okay. So the blood supply is via the radial artery branch. This is the radial artery, and there's a branch. This is the radial artery, and a branch of radial artery known as the dorsal carpal branch. Dorsal carpal branch of the radial artery. This supplies the scaphoid from the proximal, from the distal to the proximal part. So if there is a fracture over here, this distal part, the proximal part is highly prone for avascular necrosis and malunion. And if the fracture is over the waist, so if the fracture is in the proximal part, there's the highest risk for avascular necrosis of the proximal pole. Then if the fracture is in the waist region, there is a moderate risk. There's a moderate risk. Okay. And if there is the fracture is in the distal part, there is comparatively low risk for avascular necrosis. Okay, how do you see avascular necrosis on X-ray? Okay, that for the part that is undergoing avascular necrosis will get sclerosed. That is, right? It will be white in color. Why this happens is because of reduced bone turnover. Because of that avascular necrosis, the bone gets sclerosed. And on MRI, you'll see it as on T1, it will be dark. Okay, if there is avascular necrosis. Now let's see some dislocation of carpal bones. Okay, let's talk about dislocation of carpal bone. Dislocation of carpal bone. We'll start from the lowest severity to the highest severity. Okay, low severity as it goes the side, the severity keeps increasing. Okay, highest severity. Okay, so There are four types of carpal bone fracture dislocation. The lowest severity is the scapholunate dislocation. Then comes the perilunate dislocation. Then next comes the midcarpal dislocation. And finally, the most severe type is the lunate dislocation. Okay. Okay, we'll see each one in detail, uh, concentrating on the main parts. Okay. So first is the scapholunate dislocation. As the name suggests, what happens over here is okay, this is that is the radius and ulna. Then comes these are the carpal bones. The scaphoid, lunate, trichotrapezium, trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, and hamate. Okay. So a pisiform I didn't draw here because it's in a different plane. Okay. So this is the scaphoid and the lunate. And the large one is the capitate. Okay. We need to remember only these three. Okay. So here what happens is the scapholunate dislocation. There's a dislocation between the scaphoid and the lunate. There's a big gap. And this gap is usually more than 3 mm. And this is known as, there's a term, Terry Thomas sign. Terry Thomas sign on X-ray AP. Okay. Terry Thomas sign on X-ray AP. So what is that? We'll just see. Uh, so in Terry Thomas sign, you see the scaphoid, and this is the side of the scaphoid. Okay. So the scaphoid and the lunate, there's a gap in between the scaphoid and the lunate. Okay. And this gap should be more than 3 mm. And that is the Terry Thomas sign. So what do you do? What is the next step or the next X-ray that you need to take if you have any doubt or confusion if there is a scapholunate dislocation? That's a commonly asked question. So we take a clenched fist view. So basically you clench your fist, both the fist, and AP X-ray is taken. Usually bilaterally it is taken. And the scapholunate gap is measured. So you can see here it is normal and here also it is normal. So this is a normal scapholunate alignment. So there's no scapholunate dislocation over here. So that is the Terry Thomas sign and the scapholunate dislocation. So the gap will be more than 3 mm. So next is the perilunate dislocation. So what happens in a perilunate dislocation is, okay, this is the radius, then comes the lunate, then above the lunate, there's large bone that is a capitate. This is lunate, this is the radius. Okay. Here the lunate stays put, but the capitate is dislocated. Okay. This is the axis. You can see the capitate is dislocated, whereas the lunate is right above the radius and it stays put. So in perilunate dislocation, if the lunate stays put and the carpal bones around the lunate, they are dislocated. And 60% of the time, this is associated with scaphoid fracture. 60% of the time, this is associated with a scaphoid fracture. So when the scaphoid gets fractured, the capitate bone moves down. Okay. So this is the perilunate dislocation. And if it is associated with a scaphoid fracture, it will be called as a transscaphoid perilunate dislocation. The naming is based on whichever bone is fractured. That is called as trans. Then comes the name of the dislocation. So transscaphoid perilunate dislocation. And next is the midcarpal dislocation. Okay. This is the radius. And here what happens is both the lunate and the carpal, or lunate and the capitate is dislocated in midcarpal dislocation. Okay. So the lunate comes over here and the capitate is also dislocated. So both are dislocated. You can see the axis. Okay. And this is commonly associated with the triquetral fracture. And this happens because of triquetral-lunate ligament disruption. Okay. Triquetral-lunate ligament disruption is commonly seen in this. Okay. So the last one, which is the most severe, is just a lunate dislocation. Even though just the lunate is dislocated, it is the most severe. So you can see the lunate is dislocated, whereas the capitate stays put. Okay. So this will result on the lateral X-ray, this will result in a characteristic appearance known as a spilled teacup appearance. You can see this looks like a spilled teacup. So it's called a spilled teacup appearance on a lateral. And on a AP, it will result in another characteristic appearance known as piece of pie appearance on the AP view. So this is the most severe type. So let's see some images. Okay, so this is a transcaphoid perilunate dislocation. We just the first the the second one is the transcaphoid perilunate dislocation. Where is the mouse pointer? Okay, so transcaphoid perilunate dislocation. The scaphoid lunate dislocation, we have seen it initially with the Terry Thomas sign and all. So I'll just show the transcaphoid perilunate dislocation. So here only the capitate is dislocated, whereas the lunate stays put. So here this is the lateral view. You can see this is the lunate bone that is in contact with the radius. Okay, and above it, capitate should have been here, but capitate is seen over here. So it has dislocated posteriorly or dorsally. So only the capitate is dislocated. So this is known as, and usually it will be associated with a scaphoid fracture. So it's called as a transcaphoid perilunate dislocation. Okay. And the next one is a midcarpal dislocation. Then if you remember midcarpal dislocation, what do you see on a midcarpal dislocation? Both the lunate and the capitate are dislocated. So here you can see the lunate is dislocated over here and the capitate also is dislocated. Another midcarpal dislocation. You can see the lunate over here. It's actually not completely dislocated. It's there's a partial dislocation of the lunate and the capitate is over here. It has moved posteriorly. So that is another example of midcarpal dislocation. Then comes the most severe variety, that is a lunate dislocation. So here you can see the just what I said, the two type of uh, signs seen. One is on the AP, that is the piece of pie appearance of the lunate. This is the lunate bone that is dislocated. So that forms the piece of pie appearance on the AP and filled teacup view on the lateral, appearance on the lateral, you can see. So this happens because of a ligament disruption known as radiolunate ligament disruption. Okay. From the radius to the lunate, there is a ligament that gets disrupted. Because of that, the lunate goes anteriorly like this. Okay. So this is the most severe variety of it. Okay.